Looking at these lines that are just coming through, I mean, there has to be a level of skepticism, given that the language is not particularly strong and the commitments probably aren't either.
Well, it's quite vague, certainly, the statement we got initially from Xinhua News Agency, then the USTR confirming that there were talks, of course, between Lighthizer, Mnuchin and Liu He, of course, on the Chinese side. You're right to point out there aren't a lot of details in this. We're getting the Global Times, which is a state-backed tabloid here, putting out some lines saying that maybe they were discussing some agricultural purchases. We know that there have been these key tipping points around the phase one part of the deal, which is the extent to which and the time frame for any Chinese ag purchases. So no surprise if those were discussed. And of course, the other element in this mix as well in terms of the discussions has been intellectual property. You got some movement on that from the Chinese side over the weekend, suggesting that they were going to firm up their IP regime. That may have moved the dial somewhat as well. And then, of course, there's the question of tariffs, and China's wanting to be pushed or pushing for a rollback, at least a partial rollback of these tariffs. So you can presume that some of these issues came up in this call. As you say, the two sides saying they're going to keep these discussions going as they lead up to this phase one deal. We heard, of course, last week from Liu He, China's vice premier, saying that he was quote-unquote cautiously optimistic that they might get a trade deal. But of course, there's a big question mark over the timing, given that we have potentially an unofficial deadline of December the 15th, which is when the US will have to decide whether or not to impose additional tariffs. So question marks, of course, still, you're right to point those out, but maybe a little bit of momentum in terms of the fact that the two sides continue to talk on these issues.